Hi, I'm Susanna. Welcome back to Fatal Dates, my show about finding real sex and love in an unreal world. So excited, my guest today is Ashley Frawley, author, academic, broadcaster, and amazing superstar. Really looking forward to talking to Ashley about women, Marxism, objects and subjects, many other topics, I'm sure. Ashley is an absolute goddess, so I've decided that I'm going to dress up too today. So yeah, I am wearing my outfit, my fantastic shoes. Really looking forward to this. Hi Ashley, thank you so much for being on Fatal Dates.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Oh, it's a total pleasure. I just want to say I'm a massive fan. Thank you so much. I also really love watching you and seeing you because you are so glamorous, and because of the look, the lips, the clothes, the fun that you seem to be having, the non-denial of yourself that seems to be going out there. How did this look evolve? You've talked a bit about blotchy skin tone, but I know that's not the whole story. I want to know, have you always been so glamorous? I want to know the history of the look and the glamour. If you don't mind, that would be fascinating for me. How did you evolve into the goddess that you are?
It's funny because a friend of mine a long time ago, we were preparing for a conference and we joked that we were going to plant each other in the conference, and during the questions we were going to stand up and be like, Ashley, how do you, like me, you think, Nick, how do you manage to be so handsome and intelligent? Good question. That would be the questions that we would answer from the audience. No, but obviously that's really, really flattering. Thank you so much. It makes me feel really uncomfortable actually, because I find that when someone says something nice, especially in the comments, someone else will come along and like snipe. And it kind of reminds me of like being in, having older siblings. Like, if you're ever happy, they'll be like, yeah, but what you're doing is stupid.
Do you have older siblings?
I have two older siblings. I have a sister who's almost 7 years older than me and a brother who's three years older than me, almost exactly. That's very much how they are. They're like, yeah, you're successful, but like, in this kind of like cheeky sort of way. But anyways, that's what it reminds me of, like growing up with two older siblings. That's what the internet is like. But anyways, yeah, sort of the look thing. I've always worn a lot of makeup. I've always enjoyed it since I was about 14 years old. I think I've worn makeup like day in, day out. And only recently have I begun to feel sort of comfortable. I've been on the internet a couple of times without any makeup on at all. But I never used to leave the house without makeup, ever, ever, ever. And as I got older, it became sort of the opposite. It was like, I went through a phase when I was, when I had kids, I started having kids. I felt like, when I wore makeup when I was younger, it was because I lacked confidence in myself. And as I got older, I needed the confidence to wear makeup because you really stand out in a crowd and people look at you and people say stuff. I found that, it switched. I toned it down for a while and then I was like, I don't care. I enjoy the ability to kind of dress up and, have rainbows in my hair. They're fading at the moment. That's the problem. I got a little bit of a rainbow left here. I never had a problem with people saying stuff to me in public. And I remember I got absolutely like attacked on BBC once on The Big Questions. I was on for a completely different thing, but the last topic was about catcalling. And I told an anecdote about how when I was like 14, 15 years old, we were walking down the street, we had specifically got all dolled up and wore tummy tops and so on and walked down a busy road on purpose. And we were getting all these honks and so on. And my friend was turning around and saying, thank you. And I said to my friend, you're not supposed to like it. And that was a sort of interesting thing that I had kind of imbibed, that like you were supposed to kind of do this, but you weren't supposed to do it for male attention. But we definitely did it for male attention. And so I don't know, call me a slut, but I always enjoyed the attention from men and women that you get, and the ability to kind of turn it on and off like a faucet is something that I think women have that opportunity that maybe men don't.
It's interesting, that anecdote with your friend. You're not supposed to like it. In a way, though, showing, being so beautiful, walking down the street, being catcalled, it makes you even more attractive if you show that you don't really like it. You know, that's the sort of ambiguity. You know that this podcast is called Fatal Dates because of my interest in Fatal Strategies by Jean Baudrillard. And so much of that book is about an ambiguity and a joy in ambiguity that often puts him in conflict, for example, with pure Marxists, pure materialists, things that are about saying one thing but actually meaning something else. I do want to ask you, as someone who is so versed in Marxism, so incredibly eloquent, who speaks so to the point and clearly about these things, and who has educated me so much in the watching I've done of you on Sublation, how do you square the joy of dressing up, ambiguity, it has to be said, playing with things, with what is otherwise a very materialistic desire for the world, a very strong desire for people to get clear about things rather than unclear about things in order to promote their own happiness and well-being?
Well, I've always embraced consumption. That I've always had. I've had a because I didn't. I had a really difficult upbringing, and there were lots of things that people had that they took for granted that I wanted. And I was kind of made to feel bad for wanting that, especially as I got older and I went to university. It was like, oh, all of this stuff is just fooling you. And I was like, okay, but this is like a wealth and comfort that people just get from birth, and they don't even, it struck me that it came from a place of extraordinary security, that you could look down on the consumption habits of the working class with disdain. That you had to have a lot of money to consume things for their quality rather than their brand. Whereas I wanted some things for their brands because something that it symbolized something that I could never have. And I totally understood, like Zizek talking about who is it that buys these like gaudy things. It's poorer people. And the rich will hide their consumption habits. They can afford to do so, and they can look down on that. So I've always sort of wanted to enjoy things, and I want other people to enjoy things because my life has been so difficult. Everything is so difficult. It's still really difficult because there are lots of things that I didn't learn. I don't want to throw my family under the bus or anything. It's not their fault. It was a really difficult time for them as well. But I never learned to drive. I never would be where I am now if it weren't for my friend's family who got me a passport and took me on holiday with them. I just, some people, when you go through hard times as a child, you grow up really fast, but some people don't grow up at all. And I didn't grow up at all. I didn't have like everything that you learn from an adult from like the age of 8 onward. I never learned. I didn't have any adults around at all. I was missing all of these sorts of things. And so I felt like I never really grew up or grasped these things, and I wanted, and that made everything really, really hard. Like every fudge and thing was so hard. I remember like pulling my hair out, literally pulling my hair out because everything was so hard. I couldn't do anything. Like I just getting from point A to point B was so hard with no money, no ride, no adults, nothing. And like, this is where like having boyfriends would be really useful to me because a boyfriend came with a packaged family, who would take care of me. Anyway, so I always wanted this kind of security, and I want this enjoyment. I want the whole world to have it. And it seems extraordinarily unfair to me that we should base our politics on not consuming when everything that you see, everything that, everything you touch is the work of human hands and human creativity and minds. And we're constantly told, no, you can't have it. It's moral to want less. It's wrong to want more. No, I want more. That always spoke to me, this idea of like nothing is too good for the working class. We should all be champagne socialists. That was the kind of politics and the Marxism that spoke to me.
The average North American consumes 5 times more than a Mexican, 10 times more than a Chinese person,
Don't you
and
know
30
that a man
times more
being
than a
rich
person
is
from
like a
India.
girl being pretty? You might not
We
marry a
are
girl
the
just
most
because she's
voracious
pretty.
consumers in
But
the
my
world.
goodness, doesn't it
A
help?
world that could die
And if you had a daughter,
because of the way
wouldn't you
we
rather she
live.
didn't marry a poor man?
But I was...
You'd want her to have the most wonderful things in the world and to be very happy. Oh, why is it wrong for me to want those things?
I literally starved. I passed out, hit my head on a bathtub, and had a seizure. Like I went hungry, and I remember fantasizing about food all the time. So to this day, I take food from places. Like if there's free food, I'm there, and I fill my purse with it. I feel like I'm constantly on the edge of existence. Like something bad is always going to happen. And I recognize that money comes with a certain amount of security, and I'm always amazed at people who don't feel like something bad's going to happen. And this is why cancel culture really, really bothers me. Because I'm like, how could you do that to somebody? How could you push somebody to the edge of existence like that? Like the threat of starvation freaks me right out. Like I'm scared because I really felt that. I know what it's like not to have anything. And people go, oh, well, they'll have safety net. They'll go to the internet, the intellectual dark web, and they'll have, not everybody. And to be like deprived of your livelihood, it's like a death. It's a social death. Anyway, so yeah, it is about the freedom that wealth brings and security that wealth brings, that other people just, the rich just enjoy. Although, they have a certain amount, they're always pursued by the fear that if they enjoy, they will go and become workers if they enjoy too much. They always have to reinvest back into production. So they do feel this to a certain extent, but not the extent that the poor do. And so, yeah, it's about wealth is not just about consuming. It's also about security, the ability to leave a bad situation. It's just absolutely terrifying. And so many people in the world are stuck. They're completely stuck. And I remember what that felt like, beyond our wildest dreams. It gives us the ability to give everyone a material base of security. That's completely possible. And we just haven't figured out a way to do it yet. And we will figure it out. We have to figure it out. It's wrong to live in this world of this world of so much possibility, and to not only not to distribute it equally, but to destroy it in times of crisis, in war. And all of this is not inevitable. We can avoid it. Yeah. So this is what the fight is about. It's not just like the enjoyment of consuming, but the security and freedom that it brings.
I totally understand. So I want to ask you a really personal question. You don't have to answer it. When is the last time that you had a date? You're married, right? You're married. You have 4 kids. I know that. When is the last
I've
time
been with my husband for
like,
let me think now. We met 2005. So almost 18 years I've been with my husband. So, but we did break up.
This is your first date in 18 years.
15
maybe,
years,
maybe.
I think. We broke up briefly. Yeah. So about 15 years. Yeah.
Okay. So this is my rude and impertinent question that you don't have to answer. Sometimes when one comes from a place of, when one grows up in a place of emotional and material deprivation, you hinted and alluded to this, and I'm fascinated by this topic. One can therefore fantasize as a young teenager that the idea of love as it's told to us, the idea of relationships could come in a way that religion might have come in the past, as a sanctifying balm that would cure all problems. And when you are particularly a young woman needing love, affection, security, a good place, that can often be a very difficult situation and mental space to be in, the sort of fetishization and obsession about finding that sort of love. And I wonder, is that something that you've had experience of?
No, I never cared. I was never, when my girlfriends would talk about boys and relationships, it was like they were talking about aliens. Like I didn't care. I had a very instrumental and pragmatic view of relationships. This is really bad. I probably shouldn't admit this, but yeah, I know I never thought about getting married. I was going to be somebody, and I was going to get the F out of where I was. And that's all I cared about. I cared about nothing else. And actually, maybe that was a strategy on my part, because I kind of knew that made me irresistible. That I didn't care. I wasn't interested in relationships. It wasn't until I met my husband that I was like, oh, is that how you're supposed to feel? This is interesting. And then I never really dated anyone else after that. So, and it was great because my husband lived when he was my boyfriend, he lived in a different country. And so I had somebody there that I loved and who loved me, and I had that kind of security, but I didn't have to maintain that at all, like very, very little talk on the phone, but I could just live my life. And then I also then had an excuse if anyone came up and talked to me why I was not available. Why I could, so if I wanted friendships with men, and because I always had a boyfriend, if a man approached me, he might then be my friend, hoping maybe something else would happen, but I would then make friends that way, which was quite a handy sort of thing for me. But yeah.
Did you know that by being impregnable, as it were, that's obviously a loaded word, you were irresistible. By not being somebody who was desperate and looking for love, you therefore were irresistible to men. Were you aware of that?
Yeah, I knew exactly that having, and this is advice that I give to people now. This is maybe like really stupid advice, but I think through a process of trial and error, I can't believe I'm sharing these things. This is not me reading books. This is just me speaking who I am personally. It's by having a life that, a journey that you're going on. That's what makes other people want to come along for the ride. That's, you have to have your own goals. This is like Cosmo magazine kind of advice, but you have to have your own goals, your own life, your own journey, your own adventure. And people want that. They want to come along. They become enamored with the idea of you. Whereas if you are waiting for someone to kind of fill that, it's people might think, well, what's in it for me? Or like, there's too much pressure put on me here. I think what's in it for me is not really the right way to put it. I think it's just that the pressure of fulfilling someone else's dreams is a lot. And I think actually I broke up, me and my husband broke up, my boyfriend at the time, we broke up for a brief period because we were so young. We met when we were 19 and 20. And we were like, what are we going to do? We're going to get married? This is a bit crazy. So we broke up. I always say, like, we tried to break up, but it didn't work out. Like, we tried really hard to break up, but it was really difficult. We just kept talking and so on. But I met somebody else, and, we went through this sort of, like, honeymoon phase or whatever. But I quickly came out of it because it was like, I realized that whenever we were talking, he was only ever talking about me and about what he liked about me. And I was like, well, I want to know about you. I want to know about what's your adventure that you're going on, because that's what attracted me to him at first. He seemed very interesting, lots to say. And then he didn't want to talk about any of that stuff. And that's what made me fall out of my initial kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? That honeymoon kind of phase. Because it was like he was waiting for me to finish everything. And I was like, I don't want that. That's too much.
Okay. He needed you to kind of be the vicar in order to be somebody himself. He wasn't a person like you with his own independent life, interests, whatever. You would have to be responsible for him to a certain extent. And yeah,
I'm sure that he was. But that was the impression that I got, and that's what gave me the ick, as the kids say.
I was just reading something about Rihanna. I was reading how when she was 15, American music producer was in Barbados. She auditioned for him as part of a girl group, and then he and his wife called her back the next day because she had star quality. And what was the star quality? He said star quality is beautiful, driven, very talented women who have come from a difficult background, doesn't have to be materially difficult background, but from whatever kind of a difficult background, and have a hunger to express themselves in the world because they want the world, the whole world, not just one person, and not just sort of a conventional, in inverted commas, life that other people who come from a less difficult place might want. But they have the privation of their childhood has given them a desire to share themselves with the world, to bring joy and their star power to the world. And in hearing you talk about all of these things, I'm eliding you here with the story of Rihanna and her discovery that I found. But I also there's probably aspects. I don't know that you have. I have to say, you are a star. You must know that you're a star. You must be aware of your star power. And I think that Sublation is very lucky to have you. And I think that in general, this space online of people talking socialist ideas, different ideas, is incredibly lucky to have you, because you have star power. You bring people in. People want to hear from you. And you can also express very clearly, often very complicated ideas in a way that makes everyone think, well, of course, that's just basic human nature. Of course, that's what we want, all that, even though some of the things that you're saying are radical, shocking, different to what is conventionally meted out to us. So I wouldn't be too modest. I mean, okay, you're not quite doing the Super Bowl half-time yet, but you have star power. And it seems to me perhaps it comes from that place. Quite a vulnerable place, though, also a place where privation, instead of doing what it might do to some people, which is to want to make you just take everything in yourself, shut out the world, get as much as you can, has made you want to kind of give back to the world, to fill in like water all the spaces that you were missing when you were growing up.
I can imagine why that would be, because you got nothing to lose, right? Like this, like why wouldn't you go all in? Because it's not like if I took off to Europe on like my student loans. Like, it's not like I had any money or anything. I had student loans, and this was like, and a passport now, because my friend's mother, when I was like 16, had taken me on that trip. And this was like Pandora's box, and without any feeling at all of risk or understanding of what I was getting myself into, I took off alone.
Yeah.
It's absolutely insane. To Europe. And then I made friends and met people and carried on that way, and then met my eventual husband. I had nothing to lose. It's not like I risked anything.
Yeah.
there was nothing there. So, why wouldn't you just keep going? Why not just keep going?
What then did anchor you? What was it that then, so you went out, but what I'm piecing together is coming from a difficult place, having a supportive network of friends and friends' parents, having a sudden voyage out into the world, having an adventure, which you could have in a way that other people who had more conventional backgrounds couldn't have had, because there would have been more to tie them there, going out into the world. But then look at you now. You got your PhD. You're an eminent academic. You're there at Swansea University. You're Dr. Ashley Frawley. So how did that happen?
Well, luckily, when I was younger, I learned to read, like when I was a kid, I learned to read really quickly. And I could always read, and I didn't have, like, from like my earliest memories, I could always read, and there were always books around my house, always. My dad is like an autodidact. He likes to teach himself all kinds of things. So there were always books all over the place, and I just read and read and read. And we didn't have TV, anything like that. And I would just go to the library and I'd get books, and it was wonderful. It was so great just to like sit there and I just read all day, all night. I would read. And so I was in gifted programming and stuff. And so people always said, like, Ashley, you're really smart. You have a lot of potential and so on. So people always told me I was smart. Unfortunately, my brother never really properly learned to read, because the crucial period that we had moved to a new city, a new town, and they taught whole language approaches. So he never really learned phonics or anything like that. And then when we moved to a new city, he was way behind all the other kids, and they held him back a grade, and they didn't really understand anything at that time about any of this stuff. And they just stigmatized him. And he was never told that he was smart. In fact, he was always told he was a bad kid. And he wound up having a really difficult childhood, really difficult, unbelievably difficult childhood, and then a really difficult teenage years and young adulthood, where he was in jail and stuff like that. And I feel so bad for him. But I feel like what allowed me to kind of get out of my class position was it's weird, because there's like a split in my family. Like my mother and brother both have all these difficulties. And then my sister and my dad and I are more academic. Anyways, so because I had that, failure was never an option. And it was really the only thing that I had. And it was actually quite a bad thing, because for a short period of time, I would quit before I could fail. I was so scared of failing anything. Like I would drop out of classes if there was any thought that I could fail. And for me, fail, like it was all black and white. There's no gray area. It was like, publishable, but I thought, perfection was something I could never attain. But just doing it right or correctly was the only option. And if I made any mistake, then I failed. I would fail. I really thought I failed. Like I would submit an essay and I would be like, I failed, because there was just so much to know and I couldn't possibly know it all. And so sometimes I would just like quit. I wouldn't hand in the essays. And then finally, thank God, I had like a professor who was like, Jesus Christ, Ashley, like just hand your stuff in. If you just hand it in, you'd be fine. And I read other people's work for the first time ever. And I was like, this is terrible. This is so bad. How are you not embarrassed? And they're like, oh, I always get B's and C's. And I was like, there is a B and a C? Like I didn't understand that. And so from that point on, I promised myself I would never quit anything. I wouldn't quit. I would just show up. Even if it was crap, even if it was terrible, I thought it was bad, I would always finish, always. And so I just, after that point, I wouldn't quit anymore, ever. And it's scary because I was like pretty close. I could have gone I almost didn't graduate high school because of this problem that I had. And thank God, like a teacher was like, took me by the shoulder and was like, can you just hand your stuff in? and gave me the extra time, which is why for my students, I will do anything that I can to get them to pass. Anything in my power, because people always went out of their way for me.
What's your ultimate project? What would it look like when you're looking back on your life? What is it that you would like to have seen that you've done, that you've achieved? What is it? What is the Ashley Frawley Success Project, really?
Well, the thing is that I did everything I wanted to do by the time I was 30. Like I always wanted to write a book. I wrote a book. I always wanted to get a PhD. I got a PhD. I married somebody who is wonderful. I bought a house, which I never thought I'd be able to do. I had just a little like end terrace ex-council house, but I'm very proud of my little house. I never thought I would do any of these things. And I did them all by the time I was 30. And then it was kind of like, oh, you have to like upkeep this now. I almost had my own TV show on television. Like we had sets built. This production company hired me to host this show. And not hired me, asked me, like sought me out and asked me to host the show. We had the guests booked and everything. It was beautiful. The sets were like lush. They were very nice. And unfortunately, the funding all came crashing down right before. But, I almost made that jump.
There are so many more, it seems to me, short-term strategies around. If I were a teenager feeling down now, and I, like you, took the route reading books, but there would be many more opportunities for me not to do that, to look for solace from strangers, from synthetic products online. And that would have reduced the entire journey that I've had and perhaps the entire journey that you've had too. It's impossible to hypothesize and say, what would it have been like to be who I am in this age with those distractions? But I wonder, what do you think about that?
Well, I don't know. It's a bit of a double-edged sword because the internet allows people to access knowledge in a much easier way than would have been the case in the past. So the thing is that I find it's harder to read now. I have to like trick myself. I get distracted like everybody else just really, really easily because it's like, oh, this really difficult book or like super fun 30-second videos that give you a hit immediately. Like, which one are you going to take? Like, obviously I get tempted. And so I have to have like a distraction blocker on my phone, distraction blockers on my computer. I turned off the internet. Like no internet in my house for a period of time. And I was just using my phone when I absolutely had to, like metered data connection. And I would just like print off a stack of papers I needed to get through and just go home and read. So there were like certain things I had to do in order to maintain my attention long enough to actually read things. And I always I have this habit of assuming everybody knows what I know. and that I have to when I talk to people, I have to like push beyond what I know and go a little bit further. And then people are looking at me like, what the hell are you on about? So I often assume this. So then I assume when I'm talking about something, if we're talking about this thing, we've both read the same text. And then I'm a bit shocked when I find that they haven't read the text, but they are speaking super confidently. And I asked my friend once, and I'm shocked. I'm like, but that's not there. You've misread that text. And I'm looking at them like, well, why are you speaking so confidently about a text you haven't read? And I was like, what are they reading? I said to my friend, what are these people reading? And he says, each other's posts. That's what they're reading. They're reading posts. And it's exactly like, this is what I study as well, is like how information spreads in these like bite-sized pieces. And just people will repeat the same claims because it works. It worked in this one conversation to win. And so then they'll repeat it again and again and again. And then what people are repeating gets further and further and further away from the original source material. It doesn't matter anymore. It becomes more about rhetoric. But yeah, I was kind of, I just wondered, it might be more bite-sized information or something like that.
I'm hearing that your imposter syndrome, I'll call it that, it's possibly the wrong thing to call it, but your feeling of being less than other people because of whatever you went through growing up has been of a tremendous advantage to you, has made you into a very powerful thinker who reads the whole texts, who has that, you have the confidence of knowing exactly what you're talking about, which I think is what I respond so much to when I hear you speak.
Oh, maybe. I don't know. I also don't trust my own readings of texts. I would read things and I don't trust either also the authors of the text. This is the thing that I've noticed. Like, I've got a friend who, whenever he reads a book, he becomes like the champion of that author and that book. Not me. No, I don't trust the author at all. Like, I had, like, even the path for me to become a Marxist, I had to make sure that I wouldn't call myself, I refused to call myself a Marxist, although I was a lefty, until I had read Capital. And I did like Capital reading groups and stuff like that. And because, like, when I was younger, I remember trying to read Capital once on my own. And I went to a conference, I was first year of my PhD, it just started. And someone was like, "Oh yeah, you read Capital." I was like, "Yes, I did." And they were like, "Well, then what is value?" And I was like, I had not imbibed like the most important part of the text. So I was like, okay. So, because you get caught out, right? This is from experience. Like, I'm not going to walk around talking. It scares the shit out of me, like, to be walking around talking confidently and get caught out like that. It still will happen. So I did a reading group, and I did like reading groups. And then before I called myself a Marxist, I went and I needed to know what the criticisms were. And so I went and I started reading like Austrian economics, and I like economists who take seriously the other side. So I always liked Schumpeter. I like Grossman because he gives like a really good critique of like mainstream economics or classical economics. I like people who are honest and give the other side. I want that, or else I can't make up my mind. Anyway, so I went through and I read as many critiques as I could, and I kind of decided. And then I went into the whole TSSI school of thought with Andrew Kleiman and Alan Freeman and so on. And I decided, I was pretty convinced by that. And then I would call myself a Marxist after that. But it was like,
how many years did it take for you to be able to confidently call yourself a Marxist?
4 years, I would say. 4 years.
Okay. You know that I'm fond of Baudrillard. Have you read Baudrillard? What's your opinion of Baudrillard?
When I was an undergraduate, yes, but I don't really remember anything, I have to admit. I mean, this is the thing, like everything that I read as an undergraduate, I sort of, or over the years too, this is a problem for me. I kind of absorbed, and I'm not able to demarcate like where things have come from. So periodically I reread Hegel, some bits of Hegel, or I reread bits of Foucault. And I'm like, oh, that's the thing that I say all the time. Like, or like I reread All That Is Solid Melts Into Air after many, and I didn't think I ever read that book. Like, it was on my shelf, and I was like, oh, I better finally read this book. I opened it. It's full of notes and like things that I thought were just my ideas that I say all the time. They're all friggin' in Marshall Berman. So I absorbed all these things, and then I've watched your show a few times. I'm like, oh, is that where that's come from? Was it when I read bits of Baudrillard? I took a class called Sociology of Cultural Forms in my third year of university, where I came across a lot of this stuff. But I must admit, yes, I let's just pretend I know nothing, and it's probably correct.
Appearing on Sublation, being part of the wider Sublation family, because and that comes from me from my interest in Baudrillard. Often there's a point where things become difficult with the regular Sublation audience versus the reading that I have done. And it's interesting that you bring up Foucault, because for me, one of the most interesting Baudrillard texts is his book, Forget Foucault. And the heresy that he says in there is that what Foucault talks about, his analyses of power, all that may be true, but the presupposition behind that, and I guess the presupposition behind classical Marxist thought, is that those things are true. Power structures as analyzed by Foucault are true, but they can also be reversed. They can be undermined in a variety of ways. And he says that an issue often that the people that revolutionary thought wants to reach, often the working class, is the working class know that they themselves have weapons of disdain, of sexual attraction, of upheaval and reversal that can upend power structures.
I think that the left has lost a vision of the future. I think that the old vision no longer holds. And there no longer is a larger discursive frame to try to make sense of what has gone wrong. And I see identity politics as being part of this phenomenon, with the, I think, illusion that if different groups are identitarian, it will add up to a majority. But even if that's true, which it wouldn't be, even if that were the case, that doesn't give you a vision of a future society.
My optimistic side agrees. And I mean, even if it weren't true, I'd have to behave as though it were, or else there's no hope. Yeah, I suppose for Foucault, there is a tendency to see power, obviously, as everywhere. And even, like, if you think about the panopticon, even the watchers, it's not like they're free of power or like they have no power exerted over them. They are also subject to complex forms of surveillance. So it's everywhere. And the technology tries to kind of surmount the freedom of the individual so that there's no way out at all. Even the watchers are being watched. And you can see that now with like modern technologies where the ideal is, there's this deep distrust of the human that does the labeling and the human that does the diagnosing. So for instance, I always use this example because it's very disturbing, but I was on this panel once and one of the speakers was very excitedly talking about the brave new world of cell phone technology that will be able to diagnose you with psychiatric ailments depending on your eye movements. And I found that very interesting because it's like even the tech, it's trying to displace the human hand or the human mind by using technology to diagnose you. There's a special issue that I'm contributing to in Sociological Research Online's journal. One of the papers is very interesting, is talking about digital forms of psychological surveillance where they don't trust your self-reports and they're trying to use the technology to bypass the self-report. So they don't trust you left to your own devices, like your own literal devices, but yourself. They don't trust your own self kind of surveillance. So this power becomes like everywhere and it's all pervading. But the thing is,
you can always switch off your phone. Your phone can always run out of power.
Yeah, but there are other forms of surveillance as well. Like even when you're not, the thing about the panopticon is even when you're not being directly observed, you observe yourself because you've internalized the eye of the watcher. That's the point, is that because you could be observed at any time and you don't know whether or not you're being observed at that time. And the surveillance comes from everywhere, not just your phone.
But it's also to some degree, that's true, but it's also to some degree because you've been told a story that you are powerless and you've been told a story that you're being watched everywhere. And that also is a driver to make you swallow the panopticon and believe that you are. Even an analysis like Foucault's can contribute unwittingly to the feeling that there's no way out, if you see what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
That's why because it just, it says, there's always a reversibility. There's always a reversibility, which is hopeful to me. Anyway, enough about these men.
Here's the thing.
Sorry, carry on.
Oh, I was going to say, and then the other thing that pops into my head sometimes, which I don't believe myself, but is worth mentioning, is this idea that of Gramsci, that the working class will not revolt because it's not that they want to emancipate themselves from oppression. They want to be the oppressor. So in these kinds of situations, It's not that you want to be free. It's that you want to be the one doing the oppressing. And I don't believe that.
Okay, but there's also a third way, which is, I just want to live my life. I don't want to have to make choice. I want to let other people make a choice on my behalf. And there is a certain extent where choice is kind of vulgar. And I'm thinking of a particular bit in Baudrillard where he talks about, in fact, it's in a dialogue he has at the end of Forget Foucault, where he talks about Beau Brummel, who was 18th century English aristocrat and dandy, who went on a holiday to the Scottish lakes with his valet. And at the end, someone was asking him, which lake did you like best? He turns to his valet and says to his valet, which lake did I prefer? Because he's such a dandy that he knows that choice is vulgar. That you know, the work of doing choice is let somebody else do the work of doing choice. And I feel that is often what I feel, what lots of people feel, which is like, for fuck's sake, it's so complicated. Let somebody else choose those things. So it's not so much you want to oppress, it's not so much that you want to escape your oppression, but it's just fuck that shit, basically. Let me offload that onto somebody else.
Here's something that's going to piss people off, but like a lot of women don't enjoy sex, but they will do it. And the likelihood of having an orgasm does not appear to affect a woman's choice about whether or not to have sex. And you tell this to a man and they freak out and they're like, well, women need to speak up in bed, blah, blah, blah. But they're like, no, I'm fine.
Yeah.
I don't want to have to do that.
Exactly. And this is very much something that Baudrillard talks about, writes about, and a reason that he says it's a very capitalistic thing to reduce sex to orgasm, to reduce sex to my desire has been satisfied. He says, we're all just little shoppers. I want an orgasm from you. I'm going to do it. And he says, a male satisfaction might be about the achieving of an orgasm of sexual pleasure, but why does it have to be that women's liberation means that that's what women's sexuality is too? And for him, and here I talk very loosely, men, women, I'm using it as a shorthand, forgive me, I'm talking about people who like to receive pleasure and people who like to be, giving pleasure gives pleasure is a certain way of looking at female sexuality. And what he says is having an orgasm is not the be all and end all of sex for some people. Just giving somebody else pleasure is a pleasurable experience. Feeling that somebody else gets such pleasure from you is a pleasurable experience. And you can have a diffused experience in sex that is every bit as powerful. You don't have to translate it down and say a man has a visible orgasm. Women's liberation means a woman having a visible orgasm. It's such a very narrow way of looking at it.
So how did you come to Baudrillard?
I'm a nerd, a fantasist, and a novelist. And I studied history at university. I always read theory. I was always interested in theory. And I think I was always, I'm an abstract thinker. I had a lot of big unanswered questions. The world seemed strange to me. I wanted somebody to figure it out for me and in the widest possible way. And I was an arts graduate. There was a point in my life, in my early 30s, where I was encountering a lot of very strange romantic problems. I'm not going to go too deeply into it, but a lot of those problems were to do with masks, facades, my own, other people. It was a very particular romantic issue that I had, which was about masks and fakes. And I would go after work and I would read self-help books in bookstores, but they're too nice and friendly and chatty. They weren't getting into kind of meat and grit about it. And in fact, as you may know, for Sublation, I'm writing a book about my dating tips from Baudrillard, and part of that is a kind of memoir about this kind of stuff. And it certainly begins with, I was looking for much more serious, deep answers than the self-help books were giving me. And it was just about at the time when the Matrix movies were coming out. So Baudrillard was back in the news because he's the inspiration for the Matrix movies, although he disavowed them. But the Wachowskis, they cite him for what? And it was about masks. It was about fakes, things that seem one way but that are another. People are issues of people being fakes, but the issue of that being okay and you being some kind of rube if you're not a fake too and if you don't acknowledge that we're all fakes. And I wanted to get Simulacra and Simulation. It wasn't there. Instead, there was his book, The Perfect Crime, which actually was a much better book for, you can't always get what you want. Sometimes you get what you need. That book is a great place to start reading Baudrillard because it's kind of like his greatest hits. There was a bit in it that just blew my mind, which is basically a bit where he says, the violence is to make everything equal. The violence is to say, hey guys, welcome to the brand new world. Everybody come and sit in your identically shaped pod in the ice cube tray. You're a bit like this. You're from Canada. I'm from Britain. We're different, but we're similarly different. And that's what the Matrix is. That's what the violence is. When you say to everybody, come sit in your little place in the ice cube tray where you're all similarly different. And what he said is, things are not similarly different. Some things are asymmetrically different. And one of the things that is asymmetrically different is men and women. And what he said that blew my mind, and purely from the most selfish reasons, actually, he said, and in the asymmetric relationship between men and women, it's women who have all the power.
Has Baudrillard ever led you astray in your dating life? Does it actually work?
Definitely. Well, yes. I have to say, it completely, absolutely works. However, in the end, I've read a lot of Baudrillard. I've read a lot of other male theorists because I started reading Baudrillard. And in the end, he's just a guy.
That's a good point. And maybe that's a good place to end. What do men know?